Hi, my name is Allison Arnold. I am the Agriculture Extension Agent for Cooperative Extension here in Buncombe County. I'll be your host today. Craig Mauney has worked as an extension agent for the North Carolina Cooperative Extension for over 25 years. He is presently the Extension Area Specialized Agent in commercial vegetable and fruit production in the 39 westernmost counties of North Carolina. Craig graduated from Berea College in Berea, Kentucky, with a bachelor's degree in agriculture and has experience in commercial and vegetable fruit production, home gardening, and landscape design. His talk today, The Incredible Edible Landscape. Thank you, Craig. Take it away.
Welcome, everybody. This is a real passion. I was just excited when I was asked to speak about this. I've spent my entire career working around my own personal landscape and want it to be edible. So I've got a lot of personal pictures in here and a lot of comments, a lot of failures I'll mention that I've done and what's worked and what hasn't worked. I want to get into the first portion, some technical things about edible landscapes and how you can make your landscape so much more incredible than other folks' landscapes. Your landscape needs to be tuned into what you want, not what someone else is telling you looks good here, looks good there. It needs to be functional for you. And that's the approach I'm taking. The edible landscape is just incorporating fruits and vegetables and herbs and those kind of producing plants in your design. It's not necessary to think about substitution. Some of these edible plants are beautiful, and you'll see some of the photographs of what I'm talking about. So develop a plan that uses edibles to solve functional problems or landscape issues, but don't make that a substitution. Make it more of a fun event. So why edible landscaping? I think growing your own food is becoming more and more popular. It's real easy to think about running out to your landscape to grab something to accentuate a meal rather than going to the store every time. It's a good financial benefit. It saves on food costs. It saved me a lot on herb cost. I'm obsessed with some of the herbs this year that I wasn't obsessed with 3 years ago. So I've always got some components I can do there. Edibles are really good in design elements. And a few of the photographs, you'll see that. These are some of the designs that are in information with our Master Gardener program. And I thought it was very good to share here. Edible landscaping is not just replacing your entire landscape. You'll see the one on the first at the top there. It's got edible plants make up 15%. And the colored portion is just a few edibles added in there, a container garden with a few things, one fruit tree, and maybe a few berries as hedges. And then we'll go up here to about 50% of the landscape is in the edible makeup. And to me, that's about as much as most people are going to try to put into their landscape. Here's one that's over 90%. Almost all the plants they're adding in their landscape are edible, including raised beds, even their arbor. I have to have a rose on my arbor, but putting a grapevine on your arbor is a different thing. So you can see the differences in the landscape there. Even adding a greenhouse in is a form of adding an edible landscape into your land. Some things we wanted to discuss: who's going to take care of that regular maintenance of the edible landscape? Sometimes edible plants take a little bit more time to keep them in shape. Who's going to harvest all that? Right now on my counters, I've got all these small cuttings of edible herbs that I'll dry over the season. And you can provide a learning experience, especially if you have a farm and you're doing these agritourisms and people can come to your home. I have a lady I work with in Charlotte. It's just got about a half an acre with her land. School children come to her home because she has a wonderful edible landscape with a lot of fruits and vegetables that they can see, and it's real close to a local elementary school. Let's look at different practical matters. One of them is pest management. The typical landscape that homeowners have is just filled with pesticides. You're going to have to be more strategic in pest management. You don't want to be spraying edible flowers if you're going to be eating them, or if you're going to spray them, know what the interval is to where you could harvest those flowers. Same thing with fruits and vegetables in your landscape. Some of the things you want to talk about is water. Some of these vegetables, when we add them to the landscape, are not drought tolerant. They need more water to be in there. Maybe you need to set up an irrigation system that's more specific to drip to where you're not having that problem. Or maybe you're in an area where you've got to conserve water. I've got plenty of water. I got 3 streams on my property, so I've got a lot of water I can utilize, and I'm not concerned about conserving except for the environment itself. but you can actually capture water and do that. And there's lots of options for capturing water for your landscape. One of the biggies are site selection. You've got to understand your site. What kind of exposure is it? Is it sun or is it shade? What is your drainage? Do you have areas that are frost pockets? I can sit on my front porch many days and watch the fog slowly lower down into my valley and my hollow. And then by the time mid-morning comes, it just raises back up. So I know about that. This is a photograph from my front. You can see all the trees in the background. I am a shade person. I have a lot of shade I deal with. And if you look right here, there are edible plants in almost every bed that I have in my landscape. You see right here is a pawpaw tree that's actually fruiting this year. I'm keeping it a small size. It's in full shade. You see there's a pine tree here. And then if you look down here, this past year I've planted upland cranberries that'll be coming up and producing this year in the landscape. So we can add neat little things and little niches in our landscape and not take away from the beauty of the landscape itself. That's what we're after when we talk about edible landscaping. Complementary elements. When we think of complementary elements, we think of adding things like statuettes or things like that. I have some whirligigs in my landscape I'll show you pictures of, but this is one I grabbed off the internet. A lot of people do these little bee homes. They're kind of cute to have in your yard. You see this is in the turf area. In my landscape, I added things like a permanent trellis so I can grow vines up here. I'll do different edibles. You can see from my back deck here on this right now, I've got peas in there and I've already planted my beans. So as soon as I pull the pea vines off, I might do Malabar spinach. So that's just elements we can add that complement your normal landscape and in oddity places like you see here on my landscape. How do I select my plants? If you're trying to do edible things, what do you like to eat? I'm going to show you some plants that are easy to add into the landscape that are small size. What is the design element that's needed? You saw that trellis right here. I'm blocking a lot of things in the background. So I'm sitting in the porch and I've got vines growing up here. I've got a cutting garden back here that doesn't always look that great when I'm whacking on it. How much space do I want to dedicate to edibles? If you're adding lettuces here and there, they're not going to last but 60 to 80 days. So you're going to be continually treating those like annuals in your landscape. And what about pesticide application? How do you feel about that? I don't do anything in my landscape except for organic items because I'm constantly harvesting things in my edible landscape. So I have to be very careful about what I spray in there. But let's talk about edibles we can add in there. Try planting just a few things like nut trees or a fruit tree. No matter what space you've got, no matter how small your space is, there's always something grafted on a small scale. I have a patio peach in a container way out in the landscape. I just thought, oh, the container's beautiful. I want to be able to see that from a sitting area. Dwarf cultivars reach about 6 to 10, and a lot of things I'm going to show you are dwarfs to where they don't get too big. Even looking at a semi-dwarf, it's 15 to 20 feet. We can still keep that 15 feet, like with my pawpaws, they're 20 to 25 foot tree in my landscape. I'm going to maintain them at that 8-9 foot level just because I don't want them to get too big. Or espaliering dwarf things in a small space, like a border, work great in the landscape. Here's a photograph looking off of my front porch. It's kind of hard to see because it's all different colors of green, but I've got blueberries in this area, a new pawpaw planted here. Here's a pear tree, peach tree, and then the blueberries continue on along this walkway. So I'm lining my walkway instead of having boxwoods. I'm doing that with blueberries. Some of the fruit and nut trees are really high maintenance. So your apples, peaches, pears are high maintenance. Even hazelnuts are high maintenance. The lower maintenance types would be persimmons, figs, pawpaws. I'm a pawpaw freak, so I have a lot of them in my landscape. People will look at some of the nut trees, they get large. Do I really want to have something this large in my landscape? Pecans really don't do great in our area here. There are a few varieties that we'll talk about in a few minutes that might work for you if you have a niche climate or you're in a lower elevation in these mountains here. Size control is big. We mentioned the dwarf and semi-dwarf. Things to consider with apples are a lot of varieties are susceptible to disease, and we don't want to be spraying all the time. I have a lot of my fruit trees clustered in a little area. It looks just like a little grove right in the landscape. But cedar apple rust, if you've got cedars nearby, or fire blight to be considered. I have a couple of pears. The Kiefer pear is a very common pear for our region that's been here for several generations that does good for the mountain region. Here's a picture of a dwarf cherry that's in my landscape. This is the second year on it, and I've already got fruit because it's a dwarf variety. I took this picture this morning. I'm so excited I might be able to eat a couple of cherries tonight, but I'm not producing to sell. I'm producing for Craig to have a few cherries on his cereal tomorrow morning. Here's another photograph with one of my walkways that's right in front of the house. You can see I've got a lot of ornamental plants here. Even this roses sharon that people aren't planting because it's invasive. But right beside it, there's an apple tree right in the landscape. It's been pruned as a typical apple tree, but it looks nice in the landscape and isn't taking away from our regular landscape. Another thing to look at are the pawpaws and persimmons and how they fit into your place. And I put a little picture down here. Everybody asks me, what is a pawpaw? What does it look like? It's just a little fruit that looks kind of like a tropical fruit. It's a smaller, attractive tree. With pawpaws, the leaves tend to bend down. Persimmons tend to bend up. So they're great to grow in the understory. They'll survive in the understory, the pawpaw will, but you need two of them to really have good fruit if that's what you're after. If you're beauty, we're breeding some pawpaws that are going to be better in the landscape instead of the orchard.
There's a couple of questions about pawpaws right up your alley. Will they grow at 3,300 feet? And why wouldn't they flower and fruit? How much sun do they need? And is there an age before they start flowering and fruiting?
Good. I can answer all that just with one little paragraph. Yes, pawpaws will grow at any elevation. And we actually have them all the way up into Ohio, the Appalachian Mountain Range. I found them at 5,000. I feel that if you get much over 3,500 feet of elevation, we don't seem to see fruiting that much. We see them more in the valleys at those high elevations or on the slope areas or where you've got a valley going through a high elevation, and they'll be down in that lower section where there's a little bit more moisture. Some of our higher elevations tend to have really dry winters, so they don't tend to colonize at that elevation, but you can grow them in the home landscape very easily. Not a problem in that. The pawpaw that are grafted are varieties that we've chosen out of the woods. They tend to fruit a lot faster in full sun. 5 years is probably what you need to look at. We're able to, in a few cases, get fruit on the grafted varieties in 4 years, and that's kind of unheard of. I did that in Winston-Salem, but I was out there every 2 or 3 days working on those pawpaws, so that was success. They're a complete flower, but what happens is they're not pollinated by bees. So we're depending on nighttime bugs, really, a lot of creepy crawlers of the nighttime, gnats, those kind of oddball things to pollinate with, so that they're a complete flower. But the stamens and the pistils don't mature at the same time. We need two varieties where they can cross-pollinate very easily in the sun. Now, I have in full shade and full sun pawpaws growing. The ones in full shade are just now 4 feet tall, and they've been there 4 years. Very slow growing, very large internodes in their native setting. You see the pawpaw on creek banks, and they may never have fruit for years because they need a sun to put fruit. So what I do is make sure I've got some dapple sunlight coming in, and the 4-year-olds that I first planted on my property I have now are just blooming this year. I could have let them produce, but the limbs are still wavy because they're in the shade. That being said, they'll fruit, but it's going to take me 6 years minimum to get fruit in the shade. I've already got fruit in my sun in the 4-year time period. If you're doing a seedling, growing from seed, then it takes a lot more years for them to produce. You're looking at 6 or 7. So it's very variable and very with variety on that. So be patient. Chestnuts are very large. The Chinese chestnut have attractive, shiny foliage, and they'll shade areas heavily. The Chinese American hybrids are doing a pretty good job for us in the region as we plant more and more of them. Pecans, because everybody asks me about that, I really normally recommend to not do that in our region, but sometimes in the home landscape, you just got to have it. Those thin shell types tend to work good. A later bloom and scab resistance, what you're looking at. These two varieties I've shown here, the Aimling and Gloria Gonza tend to do okay for us. If you're in a lower elevation in the Asheville area, there's a lot of pests and a lot of problems with pecan trees. So that's my least favorite to put in the landscape. Try planting some vegetables. Vegetables are short-lived, give you some great color, adding greens, lettuces. I'm in love with the Malabar spinach. Most of my family doesn't like to eat spinach, but it's a really nice little spinach. So adding those vegetables, especially annual vegetables, are going to give you lots of variety. They're wonderfully, beautifully colored okra that do really great. You can use those for crafts. Gourds do good, making a arbor with a gourd tunnel where the gourds are hanging down. A foliage like peppers, squashes do great. Different kinds of kale, the curly kale. And Swiss chard is a wonderful one. Even beets do real well. This photograph is one of the walls at my home, and this is the only vegetable bed I have. This is a cover crop here. And then at the corner, I have a rhubarb plant that comes up every year. And then I planted a few days ago another bush cherry that I just purchased right in this region. So I'm incorporating things, and I can have a few fresh vegetables. You can see their garlic is growing right here that I planted last fall. Salads are wonderful. A lot of times you just want a quick small salad. Adding edible flowers like calendula or nasturtiums are great. They're beautiful flowers. You let them bloom. You can still have a nice addition to your salad. Lots of different kinds of basils, little leaf basil, colorful frilly basils that are out there. They do have a lot of beneficial insect mixes of some of these edibles that are on the market where you can plant a few little small beds here and there. Raised beds are very convenient. They're easy to maintain. I would say in the landscape, 4 feet is the max. You would want them a lot narrower so you can reach in. Sometimes bringing them up taller in the landscape, a sitting area with a big raised bed to where you don't have to bend over to work on it. You can see in this picture of my landscape, I've got levels, I have fruits, and then I have vegetables, and I have strawberries and blackberries and just different things added in. And I have my tulips I replant every year, and then I'll follow that with another annual flower. Just go over some plants I think work good, and you can see what they look like if you were adding to your landscape. The earliest vegetable for our landscape is asparagus. It makes a great big fluffy fern when you're through harvesting. So in the early spring, you can have a few servings of asparagus. Another one is the different kinds of mustard. My particular favorite for the landscape, you can see the picture of it here. I've stuck it up near a piece of wood. You got this nice red mustard color. Another one is endive. Curly endive makes really clumpy little round things. You can add that into your landscape and you still got something to munch on. Here's that Malabar spinach. I didn't have a picture. This is an old one with the blooms. It does have a real pretty bloom on it as well as the shiny leaf. The smaller leaves tend to be more flavorful than the other ones. They're harsher like regular spinach. Mini peppers, these Thai peppers, there's all colors of peppers that we could add into our landscape as a little nice clump growing somewhere. Or you've got a flower box. Instead of having all flowers and stuff in there, you can see the rainbow chard in there, giving you some nice color. You can go in and cut a few of those things and have that for supper. Adding in small fruits is another one. Strawberries are great as a ground cover. Instead of using ivy, you have to choose the varieties that do a lot of runners and fill in good. Grapes are a good one. Elderberries. I think I've got a nice specimen plant of an elderberry in my landscape. I'll show you. Blueberries, raspberries, and blackberries work great. Hedging them works good. You can see in this picture I'm showing here, this is my raspberries, and then on down there I've got blackberries, but I chose to cut them down in the fall. So they come up and then make a nice little hedge. A few years ago, I did 2 crops a year. I've got these wonderful Nanahala raspberries. Works really good in your landscape.
Hey, Craig, before we go on, this is perfect because we've got a couple of questions in the chat box.
Okay, great.
The most recent question is about the berries. I'm wondering how you keep them from becoming invasive, and also how do you handle bears?
I'll talk about both of those right now. I actually have a problem with bears.
And I'll just tack this other one on because there's a question about other wildlife like voles and rabbits and deer.
Okay, I'll talk about that briefly because it takes a long time to talk about those. But I'll talk about some of the ones that hit you with the edible landscape more than the others. And one of those is a bear. With the blackberries, I don't have problems them becoming aggressive because they're slower than the raspberries. You can see from right here on the picture on the raspberries, how they really thicken up. So I've got mine on a raised bed, and we're going to put some wood in below here. I know where I've got a definition line. So I go in there and keep this walkway open. I have these borders that I won't allow the berries to go, and then they get thick in here. Then I'll go in and thin out and kill them. That's what I do with my berries. Or your blueberries, you don't have a problem. Probably some of the raspberries, even some of the yellow and some of those colors for the home garden that we don't normally recommend commercially work good. They're not quite as invasive. Black bears, I haven't got a good answer for that. What we try to do is deter them with smells. My neighbors let me know when they're coming down. I had a black bear 2 years ago sit down and ate all of my blueberries while I was on the back porch, and I threw rocks at her, BBs, nothing worked. She finally ate, and her and her cub left because I'm right in the edge of the woods. So what I've been doing is spraying when I know she's in the area. I start spraying a deer off type product, and that's all I can do. I just hope that they don't get me. With raccoons, they have destroyed a lot of my fruit trees because they climb up in them and break them down. I've got a depredation permit, so I'm trapping them. I trapped 5 raccoons 2 years ago. Last year, no raccoon problems. This year, I have 1 raccoon that got me. Trapping again. Rabbits, the same thing. I have to remove them. Squirrels, I'm just sharing with squirrels, but I don't recommend, if you're wanting an edible landscape, to really promote birds unless you want to share your fruit with them. I don't want to share my fruit, so I try to deter birds as much as I can, which I can't because they love a landscape lush like this one. Voles, I've done a really good job with voles because I don't put too thick of mulch. And so I have that happy medium between good weed control and mulch. So I sprinkle every year. But around most of my fruit trees, I have no mulch within 8 to 10 inches around the tree itself. And that way the voles can't get to it. The moles is a bigger problem for me. I had my turf destroyed last year from moles. So I'm doing the poisons in the runs of that. The voles, you can do the same thing. You can do trapping on the voles. There's lots of leaflets that Allison can send you if you just let the extension off snow. But I'm having a lot more problems with moles than voles because I've got a really good amount of worms in my landscape, and they go after the grubs and worms too. So it's a battle that I'm fighting. Oh, groundhogs. I'm having no problems with groundhogs. Killing them is the recommended way a lot of times, and we don't want to do that. So I do sprays. That egg spray that you'll use for deer works good if they're coming from your creek up, making a barrier. And I've actually had to put fencing. I don't have any groundhogs anymore. I've done some trapping and got rid of them. The families don't want to come back. Using wire over things temporarily to where you can keep them from eating them. But it's a constant battle with the groundhogs if you're in an open field area. I'm in more of a forest, so I can drive them away easier. The less sun, the less groundhogs is what I'm seeing mostly.
Craig, just really quickly, there's one more. A good question about apples and reducing disease or even fire blight. Is it better to intermix your apples or plant them together?
I have both. That's not answering the question correctly, but I have a little cluster on one side where I've got a lot of sun, a mix of apples, peaches, and pears together. And then I've got individual trees around the area as well. I'm seeing that it's easier to have a fruit load if I cluster 2 or 3 together. And then if it's something like I had to have a certain apple tree and it's really susceptible to fire blight. So I have it actually in a separate area. I don't do a lot of sprays on my fruit trees in the landscape. As a homeowner, I do copper regularly for disease control. Like right now, I'm seeing powdery mildew massively on my landscape. So that copper helps with that. And it's more of an organic spray. I'll do some oils occasionally. But I do find that the pawpaws do better individually in the landscape, and apples. Peaches, not so much. You need more sun with peaches. I tried to do them as the central leader to where they look like a Christmas tree, and that just didn't work. So I cut my peach trees down and then let them regrow into a vase shape. So that works better in a cluster.
Okay, great. Thank
Good.
you.
Blueberries are one of my favorites. This is a variety that in the picture called Perpetua or Perpetua. I can't pronounce that correctly. Small, low bush, real shiny, heavy fruit load. I sometimes get 2 things of fruit a year off of this. Works good for a container. There's lots of varieties. They even call one patented variety or group called Brazzleberry blueberries. They're all low bush. So they make a good edging. You'll see a picture in a minute. They're native to our area. They prefer a low pH. So you can see here, there's one blueberry plant here, one here, and I've got more and more coming. But in this area is that cluster of fruit trees. So they need a higher pH than the blueberries do. If you understand that blueberries really just need a small area, 18 to 24 inches around it that's acid. So the pH around each of these blueberries, and they're thriving very well, is right at the 4.5 range. I add organic matter in there. I actually have blueberries in full shade. You just don't get the heavy fruit load, and I choose varieties that I feel work better for me that don't get real big. Rabbit eye are great to the lower elevations for us, kind of the foothills in Piedmont. High bush is better for high elevation. So the cutoff is that 2,400 foot elevation or 25 or less. I'm at 24, 25. So I'm growing both. You need 2 varieties for good pollination. Everybody should have a blueberry because they're easy to acidify right around there like you would have an azalea. So instead of azaleas, I've added a lot of blueberries. In this photograph right here, you can see looking at my little cabin, these are pink lemonade as a hedge. This is a bush cherry. I'm excited this year. It's absolutely covered in cherries. Last year I got a quart. So this year I'm going to get another gallon or so off of this bush cherry and have enough to make jam this year off of my bush cherries. So I'm very excited about that. It's a picture I found that just shows a really good use of strawberries. These are all strawberries right here in front as a ground cover and edging, adding herbs in. There are different times that are in there. Makes a really nice entryway to a home instead of having it just formal grass. You can see my raspberries were in this direction from this picture. This is a bad picture. I want you to see that blackberries aren't that pretty in the off season. So a lot of times we'll kind of hide them. The thornless varieties are the better ones. Some of the varieties for homeowners are the Triple Crown, but there's several varieties that work really great for homeowners. You can see my raspberries. This is the year that I let them do 2 crops. So all winter I had these canes up, and I didn't like that, so I decided to just cut them down in the fall since they're a primocane type variety, and then they look a lot better this spring. You saw in that earlier picture. Here's some varieties that work real good. Heritage, I should have added in here. I discovered Nantahala. It's my most favorite red raspberry. It's the sweetest one I've ever had. These work really good. The Ruby, the Heritage, those primocane types. Some individual little shrubs. Elderberry's great. You'll see a picture in a minute how tall they get. They're 20 feet tall. I don't like the one I've got. It's just growing too tall for me, but it does make a nice specimen. I don't have this one in my landscape here, but Chinese date, the jujubes, you can see they're a drapey, 20-foot tall tree that can be kept small, and they have these wonderful purpley, light lime green fruits that are tasty, and they do really well for us in the area. Very few people grow those, but they do good for us. Herbs is another one. All sizes, shapes, colors, spacing, sun, shade, so many varieties. You just need to investigate those. Lavender is a decent one. There's another kind of lavender here. This photograph from the Piedmont. I've got lavender in a couple of areas. I just have so much shade. This needs full sun. Rosemary, one that works really great. We have the upright ones, but the creeping rosemary, the prostratus, seems to work good. And it blooms more than your upright rosemary. You can see this photograph here, how these purpley blue blooms are just beautiful as they bloom in the late summer of the year. They have to have full sun, and they're evergreen. Garlic is another one, or any of the alliums. They clump up. They're great to add 3 or 4 in a clump and put them here and there and allow them to bloom. Some of the garlics have the nice curly racemes that come out on there for eating. Chives, garlic chives work really good if you allow them to bloom like this one is here. Full sun, 12, 18 inches tall. Chamomile, Roman chamomile tends to more perennialize for us in the edible landscape around flagstones. Trinity, I believe, is the one that I've had good luck with. I don't have it in my landscape right now. Wintergreen's another one. I just planted mine this year in fairly full shade in a dry area. It'll have nice berries on it. You can use those if need be. Hops is another one. I don't want hops in my garden, but it's a really good one. It has a really good female flower that you can pull down and make it into arrangements. And if you're a beer person, you can make you a little beer on the side. Yellow root's another one I have in full shade, does real good. Part shade, it thrives and makes clumps. If it's in a little bit of sun, tends to be more leggy, which is what I have. And it just does really good on creek banks. I've got 3 creek banks with it everywhere. And it's becoming a aggressive invasive for me. I just keep digging it up and throwing it away because I got so much of it now that I put it in my garden. Another comment about herbs, if you don't have the space or time, this is one you can just let go. In this photograph right here, it's small, but you can see one of the walkways I've got. There's various different kinds of mints that I like to do for teas here. Trying to incorporate in every bed something that is edible. Another thing is if you have a small home or you're in an urban section, the front of your house is the place where you've got most of the sun. You can do an herbal entryway. Here's a picture that I pulled off the internet where you're seeing rosemary right here and edible flowers all the way up the landscape. It is adding an entryway. And it's really dramatic because as you walk, the smells come through and hit you as you're entering the home. And just another photograph of an addition that I did. I like rosehip tea. So I decided to make a small bed. This is the rugosa roses that you see they're beginning to spread down below. And I got enough last year for a few cups of tea, but this is going to be a real heavy planting. I'll allow it to get really thick and be able to get my rose hips. An outdoor room is great. I didn't take a picture of some of my outdoor rooms. I have lots of sitting areas. It could just be a hedge or a wall that you take as a base, and then you plant things around it with fragrances and things like that. And you'll make a little room where you enjoy that. It's kind of an example of that. You have a little walkway coming in. Herbs again, companions, what works good together. I've seen a lot of folks begin to add a few tomatoes into their landscape and adding basil with it. Dill and cabbage tend to go good together. Thyme and strawberries. I've added some thyme into my strawberries this year. Borders work, flower beds with borders, adding herbs with your flowers. You can see where they've got the turf and they put a little border here with a little walkway over. Now we're beginning to add herbs in here. You can see right here in the backdrop to this tree, this was a hosta garden into this area. So there's hostas and some shade tolerant herbs in here, but they've expanded this into a nice bed literally in front of the landscape and added vegetables. And they're actually very attractive. You know, we have that problem in some of our urban areas where we have zoning where you can't put edibles in the front of the yard. But if we do them in a manner where it's attractive, people wouldn't even realize that you have a vegetable garden in your front yard.
So you made a comment about not being allowed to grow veggies in the front yard. Do you want to speak about that a little bit more?
Yeah, a lot of my career was in the Piedmont and Winston-Salem, that area. Like Louisville was a little town that had laws on the books that you can't grow vegetable gardens in the front yard in the city limits. You know, they're thinking the traditional rows. We had a struggle there back in the late 90s changing those rules. A lot of your homeowner organizations put rules in there for the same way. It's for landscape preference in the homeowner associations. They want everybody to have like a cookie cutter. Everybody has a little lawn in the front and color. Even some homeowners associations have plant lists because they're trying to go more native. I'm cool with that, but edible landscaping runs into a lot of roadblocks, and one of those is that. So if you're even thinking about edible landscaping and you're thinking about buying a house in a development or in a place that has a lot of rules, check on those rules. Even though they didn't have rules on one of the developments in Clemens, there were so much complaints from the neighbors. And actually it was a beautiful vegetable garden, but it was a traditional row vegetable garden in the front yard. That's what happens. And it's becoming less in areas where we're forward thinking in landscaping in green areas like Asheville, for example, or Chapel Hill, or there's areas of Atlanta and Marietta that I have friends that are really excited that they're actually putting in their preference for native, preference for edibles.
Oh, absolutely. Growing our own food. So maybe
Yeah.
it is changing.
A lot of folks have roses. Combining herbs with roses really works well in your home landscape. Like dianthus is one that works really well. Lavender, you can see how you have this purple lavender in the backdrop with the pink roses, and this is another rose in that same area where you see the white lavender. So you can complement roses with those kinds of things in your landscape. Ground covers, herbaceous ground covers. Oregano, this is a lime colored oregano in this photograph that's really just spreading and worked really good in a rock garden. Here's creeping thyme used as a ground cover. And it's absolutely beautiful. You take plants and it spreads fairly quickly in a nice, rich little area. And you see you've got a lot of your ornamentals and beautiful flowers in the backdrop, some container gardens, and it works really well in the landscape design. The big thing is the right herb in the right place. And I added this in here so you would know what herbs you could move toward these areas. So dry, you would do yarrow, sages, thymes, wetter spots, peppermints, other types of mints. Shady sites, you would work at violets. Gerrymander works good in shade. Wintergreen, bloodroot, sweet cicely, and then a really hot sunny site would be something like your chamomile. The mints do good there. Santolina, those kind of things will do good. Good point for me to stop and take questions. I hope I've gave myself 15 minutes. I was trying to get through it to where we had a lot of time for questions or comments. I want to share this before we start. I wanted to show you that handout that we gave it. Is that showing there, Allison?
It is.
I like this leaflet because it pulls a lot of things together. Here's those designs I was showing you. Here's some great plants and varieties that work. And if you're looking for bees, some of us aren't necessarily into edibles, is we want to bring our bees. We want to promote birds. So I just thought this was a really good leaflet for you to have. It's functional.
It's great, Craig. Thank you. There's been a little conversation in the chat box about wild blackberries.
Let's talk about that. Can I talk about that now? Positive or negative? Is that what they're having a discussion about?
The question was, why not wild blackberries?
Because they're the most disease-ridden bramble out there. They're going to carry diseases. If you're trying to grow a thornless blackberry, and you've got one of those within 100 feet or so in your landscape, they carry diseases that don't hurt them, but they transfer over to the cultivated varieties. And this afternoon, I'm going to a place we think it's got orange rust. Orange rust is systemic. You get that into your landscape, and you just lose your whole plant. You have to grub it out. So that's the reason for that. That being said, I love wild blackberries. So about 300 feet away going down to my landscape, I've got a wild blackberry patch. So it's going to come out this year because I'm now going to put some natives. I put my white blackberries up in that area, and I don't want to chance that. So after this season, I'm going to dig them all out. But I had this one cluster of wild blackberries because I like the taste of the wild blackberry in jam. So, but that's the reason for not doing that. And we don't recommend that at all in the home landscape or even in the commercial. I tell people in the commercial, go all your fence rows, get rid of your blackberries because you're going to have disease problems.
So is there a distance?
About 100 feet is what you need in the home landscape. I could say 100 yards in the commercial because we could have them in ditch rows. So I'm about 100 feet right now with my white blackberries, with the native blackberries, but I'm still going to get rid of them. I just don't want to take a chance on my precious white blackberries.
Okay. All right. Great. Couple more. How do you control weeds in your pathways besides mulch?
Yeah, in my pathways, I have 4 different types of pathways on the property. I have some pathways with full moss in there. I gather moss and crumble it up and throw it in the pathways, pack it down. But that's all hand weeding. I don't use chemicals on that. In those rock pathways you saw in some of my photographs, I have a flamer. I really don't use a lot of herbicides on my property because I've got edibles and I'm afraid it'll hurt things. So I'm using that. I'm using hot water. I take a pot of hot water and then I go through and just kill it with hot water in the walkways. There are a lot of pre-emergents you can use. I have a lot of water, so I worry about those pre-emergents going into my landscape. I'm trying to promote things from seeds. Like right now, I'll have seeds germinate and I move them. I moved over 65 cardinal flower this year that come up as seedlings from seed. So I don't want to have pre-emergence in my landscape. Pre-emergence work wonderful, but be careful when you're doing a lot of vegetables into your landscape. Oh, the other thing I'm using for weed control is very unsuccessful, and people say it's successful. I've tried every one of the organic sprays, and what I'm seeing is anything grassy or perennial that's hard to kill, those vinegars, oils aren't working for me. If it's something like broadleaf that's easy to kill, no problem at all. So I'm using a combination of all that, Allison,
Okay.
working for me. And
Yeah.
weed every day.
Now, somebody put in the note that you mentioned two types of paths, moss and rock, and then were there two others?
Yeah, I have some that are just bare soil that are there on purpose, going up through areas and they're not washing, have bare soil. And then I use mulch in some of my paths. So that's the ones. I started buying gravel and then realized I could dig gravel out of my own creek. I'm really liking the gravel, and I've gotten rid of a lot of my moss ones because it's just a lot of labor. I'm having a lot of trouble just keeping the weeds out. So
Yeah.
I've reduced that.
Yeah. A lot of labor.
A lot of labor because I'm sitting there and I like to weed. I'm pulling little weeds out and then pushing my moss back down and pulling weeds out and pushing the moss back down. Also, folks, water control. If you're not putting some kind of surface on your walkways, then I'm having erosion in one area. So I'm gonna have to change it over. I'm actually seeing roots forming, and I didn't realize that the soil's going away, but I'm gonna have to put surface on that one.
We just have a couple of minutes left, and you're getting lots of great kudos in the chat box. People are really grateful for your presentation. I wanted to see if you would just speak a little bit about irrigation. I think the tendency is to put in automatic systems versus hand watering. What's needed for establishment and ongoing maintenance? Could you speak for that?
Yes, I don't believe in everything being on automatic irrigation. I think that especially in the edible landscape, you need to believe in multiple ways of irrigating. I actually have a lot of drip irrigation I'm putting in. I also use hand watering a lot. I think sometimes you could overwater something when you're doing drip even. So I have areas where I had fruit trees and shrubs, and I'll do overhead irrigation in those. It cools it down a little bit. I'm having a lot of problems sometimes with insects in those areas that I don't want to spray. So I'll actually take the overhead irrigation and reduce the population of the insects, and it washes those things off. So I drip on a lot of my shrubs. I have beds of golden seal. I'll actually put those micro sprinklers on that to make sure it gets up in the spring because it's in a drier area. So to me, the edible landscape has to embrace all types of irrigation. I do a lot of hand watering. I enjoy watering, but then I'll say, oh, my bush cherry needs a little extra this week. Then I can add a little bit of fish emulsion in there if I'm not having raccoon problems. Good question. That's wonderful.
Okay, great. Craig, thank you so much for today. We always enjoy your enthusiasm
Thank you.
and interest and your knowledge and experience. So thank you for coming and presenting today.
Yeah. Good deal.
Yeah. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. I put a couple of things in the chat box about Wednesdays in the Learning Garden. Next Wednesday, the gardeners will be here doing a regular work day, having some demonstrations. Please come out and see the Learning Garden. There's lots of great plants that'll grow in your garden. And I also put in the link for buncombestergardener.org for our future programs. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day and enjoy your garden. It's a great season to be out.
Yeah. Thank you.